The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, Earth time. It came through channels that humanity had only discovered 3 years ago, wrapped in encryption that took 17 hours to break. When Ambassador Alara Vance finally read the words on her screen, she sat very still for a long time. The Galactic Concord was summoning humanity to their capital. No species had ever received such a summons without first spending centuries proving themselves. Humanity had been watching the stars for barely a generation. They had stumbled into faster-than-light travel almost by accident, following mathematical patterns that older species had dismissed as impossible. Now the rulers of the galaxy wanted to meet them. Vance read the message again. The words were simple but carried weight like stones. Appear before the High Sovereignty. Walk the path of petitioners. Prove your species worthy of continuance. She understood what that last word meant. The Concord did not make requests. They made judgments. And species that failed those judgments did not get second chances. The news spread across Earth within hours. Some people panicked. Others prayed. Politicians gave speeches full of empty confidence. But in the quiet offices of the United Earth Council, 12 people were chosen for a task that might decide the fate of 8 billion lives. Alara Vance would lead them. She was 53 years old, a former professor of alien studies who had spent her career preparing for a moment that everyone said would never come. She had gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes from years of reading reports under poor lighting. She did not look like a hero. She looked like someone who had done too much paperwork. The others were chosen with equal care. Commander David Tyrell would handle security, though they were forbidden from carrying weapons. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was their xenobiologist, a small woman with quick eyes who had learned to speak 3 alien trade languages. Marcus Webb was their historian, a man who had insisted on coming because someone needed to write down what happened next. The rest were diplomats, scientists, and specialists in fields that might or might not matter when facing beings who had ruled the stars for 11,000 years. They departed from Earth, orbit aboard the ESV Quiet Defiance, a name that some called arrogant and others called appropriate. The ship was humanity's first true diplomatic vessel, built in the aftermath of first contact when humans realized they needed something better than converted cargo haulers. It was not impressive by galactic standards. It was simply the best they had. The journey took 19 days. Vance spent most of that time reading everything humanity knew about the Concord, which was not much. They were old. They were powerful. They controlled over 900 species across tens of thousands of worlds. And they did not tolerate challenges to their authority. The path of petitioners was mentioned in dozens of accounts from other species. It was a test, they said. A gauntlet. Some species had walked it and emerged as members of the Concord, bound by treaties and obligations, but allowed to survive. Others had walked it and never been seen again. On the 15th day, Tyrell found Vance standing alone in the observation deck, watching the strange colors of faster-than-light space swirl past the windows. "You should be sleeping," he said. "So should you." He stood beside her, a tall man with close-cropped gray hair and the careful posture of someone who had spent 30 years in military service. "The crew is nervous. They're trying not to show it, but I can tell. Are you nervous?" Tyrell considered the question. "I've been in combat. I've faced situations where death was likely. This feels different. We're not fighting anyone. We're just walking into a room and hoping they don't kill us." Vance smiled slightly. "That's all diplomacy ever is, Commander. Walking into rooms and hoping for the best." "With respect, Ambassador, most diplomats don't face species that could destroy our entire planet with a single ship." "No," she agreed. "Most don't." They watched the lights in silence for a while. Finally, Tyrell asked the question that everyone had been thinking, but no one had spoken aloud. Do you think we have a chance? Vance turned to look at him. Her eyes were tired but steady. I think we have exactly the chance we make for ourselves. The Concord has done this for thousands of years. They expect us to behave in certain ways. They expect us to be afraid, to beg, to offer anything for survival. Every species they've ever judged has followed the same pattern. And you think we should do something different? I think we should do something human. She turned back to the window. I think we should just be ourselves and see what happens. We've never been good at following patterns anyway. 4 days later, the quiet defiance dropped out of faster-than-light space above. Ethon Prime, the capital world of the Galactic Concord, filled their view screens. And for a moment, no one could speak. The planet was covered in structures that defied understanding. Towers of light rose from the surface and continued into orbit, connected by bridges that should have been impossible. Ships of 1,000 designs moved through carefully controlled lanes, each one representing a species that had bent the knee to Concord rule. The whole world glowed with power that humanity could barely comprehend. A signal reached them almost immediately. Human vessel, you are expected. Proceed to landing coordinates. Do not deviate. Vance gathered her team in the shuttle bay. 12 people in simple diplomatic uniforms, carrying nothing but translation devices and their own courage. She looked at each face in turn. Some were pale. Some were sweating. But no one suggested turning back. They're going to try to scare us, Vance said. That's what the path is for. Every species that's walked, it has either broken down or fought back. Both responses got them killed or enslaved. So what do we do? Dr. Tanaka asked. Vance straightened her collar and walked toward the shuttle. We do what humans have always done when facing impossible odds. We put one foot in front of the other, and we keep walking until we get where we're going. The shuttle descended through clouds of light and energy, through lanes of alien traffic, past structures that made Earth's greatest cities look like children's toys. The landing pad was a circle of polished crystal, surrounded by representatives of more species than humanity had ever imagined. The door opened. Strange air rushed in, carrying scents that no human had ever breathed. Beyond the pad, stretching into the impossible distance, lay the path of petitioners. Commander Tyrell looked at Vance. Walk or wait? She stepped off the shuttle, her boots touching alien ground for the first time in human history. The crystal was cool beneath her feet. The watching aliens were silent, their many eyes tracking every movement. Ambassador Alara Vance took a breath, steadied herself, and answered. We walk. The path of petitioners was 40 kilometers long. It cut through the heart of Ethon Prime like a wound, lined on both sides by platforms where thousands of alien observers stood watching. They had come from across the galaxy to see this moment. The young species. The soft ones. The humans who had somehow found their way to the stars without permission. Vance led the group forward. The crystal beneath their feet glowed faintly with each step, recording everything. Temperature, heart rate, chemical signatures of emotion. The Concord missed nothing. The first kilometer was simple. A straight path through towering structures, with aliens of every shape and size staring down at them. Some had scales. Some had tentacles. Some had bodies made of light or sound or things that human eyes could not properly see. All of them were silent. Marcus Webb, the historian, walked beside Vance with a small recording device in his hand. They're studying us, he said quietly. Every species here. They want to see how we break. Then let's not give them what they want. At the 2-kilometer mark, the architecture changed. The walls on either side became transparent, revealing what lay behind them. Glass cases stretched into the darkness, each one containing something that had once been alive. "The Garden of Extinction," Dr. Tanaka said. Her voice was steady, but her face had gone pale. "I read about this. These are species that failed the path. They walked past bones arranged in careful patterns, past preserved bodies floating in clear fluid, past artifacts and weapons and fragments of civilizations that no longer existed. Small screens beside each display played recordings. Final messages. Pleas for mercy. Screams. One of the younger diplomats, a man named Chun, stopped walking. His breathing was fast and shallow. This is what happens. This is what they do to species that fail. Vance turned back to him. She did not raise her voice or show any sign of fear. "Yes, it is. And standing here, looking at it won't change that. Keep walking, Chun. That's all any of us can do." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded and started moving again. The garden went on for 3 kilometers. 3 kilometers of death and failure and warnings written in bone and silence. The Concord had done this for 11,000 years. They had perfected the art of breaking hope. But the humans kept walking. By the time they reached kilometer 10, the environment had changed again. The walls closed in around them, and the light became strange and flickering. Sounds echoed from nowhere, deep bass rumbles that seemed to vibrate through their bones. Commander Tyrell recognized it immediately. Psychological warfare. They're using frequencies designed to trigger fear responses. Everyone, focus on your breathing. Don't let it get inside your head. The sounds got worse. Whispers in languages they couldn't understand. Sudden loud crashes that made everyone jump. The gravity shifted without warning, making them stumble and grab at each other for balance. One of the scientists, Dr. Park, fell to his knees. His hands were pressed against his ears, and his eyes were squeezed shut. I can't do this. It's inside my head. I can hear." Dr. Tanaka knelt beside him. She took his hands in hers and pulled them away from his ears. Then, very softly, she began to sing Dot. It was an old song, a lullaby from Japan that her grandmother had taught her. The words were simple, meant for children who couldn't sleep. Her voice was thin against the overwhelming noise of the path, barely audible. But Marcus Webb heard it, and he started humming along with the melody. Then Chun joined in. Then Tyrell, and his rough voice that couldn't carry a tune to save his life. One by one, the 12 humans began making music together. Not loudly, not defiantly, just a simple human sound, a reminder that they were not alone. The monitoring systems of the Concord recorded this behavior and flagged it as highly unusual. Species under psychological pressure did not typically respond by singing together. The algorithms could not categorize it properly. Dr. Park opened his eyes. The fear was still there, but it was manageable now. He got to his feet, and they kept walking. At kilometer 20, the path opened into a vast circular chamber. The walls were screens, stretching hundreds of meters high. As the humans entered, the screens flickered to life. Earth filled the chamber, blue and green and white, hanging in the darkness of space. Beautiful, fragile. Home. Then the images changed. They showed cities burning, mushroom clouds rising over familiar coastlines, orbital bombardment turning continents to glass, ships bearing the mark of the Concord hanging in Earth's sky, weapons charging. 8 billion people, dying in fire and silence. A voice spoke from everywhere at once. This is what awaits your species if you fail. Your world will be cleansed. Your people will become exhibits in the garden. Your name will be forgotten. The images continued. Children running through streets of ash. Oceans boiling away into steam. The last humans, huddled in bunkers, waiting for the end. Vance stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the death of everything she had ever known. The others had stopped behind her, unable to look away from the screens. She watched for a long moment. Then she laughed. It was not a loud laugh or a mocking one. It was small and tired and somehow sad. She turned in a slow circle, looking at all the screens, at all the different ways the Concorde had imagined destroying her people. "You think this scares us?" she said. Her voice carried through the chamber, recorded by 1,000 sensors. "We invented these images. We've been making stories about the end of our world since before we had writing. Nuclear war, asteroid impacts, climate collapse, artificial intelligence turning against us, plagues, alien invasions." She stopped turning and faced the largest screen, where Earth was shown as a dead, burning rock. "We've imagined every possible way we could die. We've written books about it, made movies, composed music. We've stared into the void so many times that we know its face better than we know our own." The screens flickered. The controlling intelligence of the path had not expected this response. "You're showing us our own nightmares," Vance continued. "We created these nightmares. We've lived with them for our entire existence as a species. And we're still here. We're still walking." She turned to the others. Some of them were crying. Some were shaking. But none of them had broken. "Come on," she said. "We still have 20 kilometers to go." They walked out of the chamber, leaving the images of Earth's destruction playing to an empty room. The observers on the platforms above had gone quiet. The watching aliens had seen many species walk the path. They had seen warriors break and flee. They had seen philosophers descend into madness. They had seen entire delegations tear themselves apart from fear. They had never seen a species respond to threats of extinction with tired recognition. At kilometer 35, with 5 kilometers remaining, the path through its final test. Illusions surrounded the humans, showing them not destruction, but temptation. Offers of power. Promises of safety. Voices that sounded like loved ones, begging them to submit, to surrender, to accept Concorde rule in exchange for survival. "Just bow," the voices said. "Just kneel. You can live. Your families can live. All you have to do is admit that you are lesser, and the fear will end." Commander Tyrell's hand moved toward a weapon that wasn't there. Old instincts, hard to suppress. But he didn't stop walking. Dr. Tanaka heard her mother's voice, pleading with her in Japanese. She let the tears fall, but didn't slow down. Marcus Webb heard the promise of immortality, of being remembered forever as the historian of humanity's submission. He kept his recording device pointed forward and said nothing. Ambassador Vance heard silence. The path had searched her mind for leverage, for weakness, for the one thing that could make her stop. It found only determination. They walked the final kilometer as the sun of Ethon Prime began to set, casting long shadows across the crystal path. Ahead of them, rising like a mountain made of light, stood the sovereignty chamber. 12 humans, tired and tear-stained and unbowed, reached the end of the path of petitioners. The door opened before them, revealing a darkness that stretched beyond comprehension. And together, without hesitation, they walked inside. The sovereignty chamber was not a room. It was a cathedral built for gods. The ceiling stretched so high that it disappeared into darkness. The walls were made of something that looked like frozen starlight, glowing with soft colors that shifted and changed. Platforms floated in the air without any visible support, filled with representatives from hundreds of species, all looking down at the small group of humans who had just entered. At the far end of the chamber, on thrones carved from impossible materials, sat the 12 high sovereigns of the Galactic Concorde. They were old. Not old like mountains or oceans, but old like stars. They had guided the Concorde since before mammals walked on Earth. They had watched civilizations rise and fall like waves on a shore. They had made decisions that shaped the fate of trillions of lives across thousands of worlds. And now they were looking at humanity. Vance led her group forward, walking across a floor that seemed to be made of captured aurora light. Each step felt significant. Each breath felt borrowed. The silence was absolute. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the air seemed to hold still, waiting. When they reached the center of the chamber, a voice spoke. It came from everywhere at once, vibrating through their bones and echoing in their minds. The words appeared in their thoughts as easily as in their ears. Humans, you stand before the high sovereignty of the Galactic Concord. Speak your names. Vance stepped forward. I am Alara Vance, representing the United Earth Council. These are my companions. She named each of them in turn, her voice steady despite the crushing presence of the beings before her. The High Sovereign in the center moved slightly. It was called Kethvaros, the first among equals, and it had held that position for longer than human civilization had existed. Its body was difficult to look at directly, shifting between forms that the human mind could not quite process. Alara Vance of Earth, Kethvaros said. Your species was not invited to this chamber because you are worthy. You were invited because you are a curiosity. The words hung in the air like a sentence. You reached the stars without permission. You developed technologies that should have taken you millennia in mere decades. You ignored every pattern of proper development. And now you stand here, in the heart of our civilization, as if you belong. Kethvaros leaned forward on its throne. The movement was small, but it sent waves of pressure through the chamber. We have watched you. Your species has no natural weapons. No armor, no telepathy, no hive mind, no biological advantages of any kind. You are soft, fragile, temporary. By every measure we use to judge civilizations, you should have died on your homeworld long ago. The other High Sovereigns remained motionless, watching. We called you here to observe your fear before we decide your fate. We expected you to break on the path, as so many others have broken. Instead, you walked through our tests and emerged unchanged. This is unexpected. Kethvaros seemed to wait for something. The silence stretched on. Now, speak. Tell us why your species deserves to continue existing. The question was clear. This was the moment every petitioning species faced. The moment when they would beg, plead, offer tribute, promise servitude. The moment when they would admit their weakness and accept whatever scraps of existence the Concord chose to grant them. Vance did not kneel. She did not beg. She looked directly at Kethvaros, a being that could destroy her world with a thought. And she spoke, "You misunderstand us." A ripple of something, perhaps surprise, moved through the watching crowd. We did not come here to prove we deserve to exist. We came because you asked, and we were curious about you. No one had ever said that before. Not in 11,000 years of petitions. Not once. You say we have no natural advantages, Vance continued. No claws or armor or psychic powers. You are correct. We are soft and fragile and temporary. We know this. We have always known this. She took a step forward. It was a small thing, but in that chamber, it felt like an act of defiance. Our world has been trying to kill us since we first climbed down from the trees. Ice ages, volcanoes, diseases, predators. We survived them all. Not because we were strong, but because we refused to die. Kethvaros said nothing. The other High Sovereigns remained still. Then, we developed intelligence. We created tools. We built civilizations. And do you know what we discovered? That the greatest threats came not from nature, but from ourselves. Vance's voice grew quieter, but somehow carried further. We have nearly destroyed ourselves 14 times. nuclear weapons, engineered plagues, climate disasters, wars that killed millions. Each time, we stood at the edge of extinction. Each time, we pulled ourselves back. Not because we were wise, but because we refused to accept that ending. She stopped walking. She was closer to the thrones now than any petitioner had ever dared to come. We walked your path of petitioners. We saw your garden of extinction. We watched our world burn in your illusions. And none of it scared us the way you expected, because we have already imagined all of it. We have written stories about our own destruction since before we had cities. We have lived with the fear of extinction every single day of our existence. She spread her hands, a gesture of openness. You cannot threaten us with death. We grew up with death. You cannot threaten us with extinction. We have been expecting extinction since the moment we first looked up at the stars and realized how small we were. The silence that followed was different from before. It was the silence of beings who were thinking, calculating, reconsidering. So no, Vance said, we will not beg. We will not plead. We will not offer tribute or promise servitude. If you decide to destroy us, we will not be surprised. We have always known it could end this way. She straightened her back, looking at the 12 ancient beings who held her species' fate in their hands. But understand this. We are not afraid of you. We are not afraid of extinction. We have faced that possibility every day since we learned to think. We did not panic on your path, because panic is a luxury for species who believe they are safe. We have never been safe. She paused, letting the words settle. We have never stopped walking. The chamber remained silent. The high sovereigns did not move, did not speak. The watching crowd of 900 species seemed to be holding its breath. Then, slowly Kethvaros rose from its throne. The movement was small but significant. No high sovereign had left their seat during a petition in over 3,000 years. Ambassador Vance of Earth, the ancient being said, you have given us much to consider. The sovereignty will deliberate. You will wait. The lights in the chamber changed, and suddenly the humans found themselves enclosed in a small area of soft illumination, separated from the rest of the vast space. How long? Tyrell asked, but the only answer was silence. The high sovereigns had vanished, retreated to dimensions beyond human understanding to decide the fate of billions. Marcus. Webb pulled out a deck of cards from his pocket. He looked at the others and shrugged. Anyone want to play while we wait? Dr. Tanaka laughed, a small sound in the enormous space. You brought cards to the judgment of our species? I brought cards everywhere. Seemed like this qualified as everywhere. They sat in a circle on the floor of the sovereignty chamber, playing cards while gods decided their fate. They told stories. They shared memories of Earth. Dr. Park fell asleep with his head on his jacket. The watching observers, from their platforms above, recorded everything. They had seen species wait before. They had seen them pace, weep, pray, argue, fight among themselves. They had never seen a species simply accept uncertainty and make the best of the time they had thought. It was very human dot, and in its own quiet way, it was terrifying. The high sovereigns gathered in a space that did not exist in normal reality. It was a dimension of pure thought, where their vast minds could operate without the limitations of physical form. Here, they had made every significant decision in the history of the Concord. Here, they would decide what to do about humanity. Kethvaros opened the deliberation with a simple statement. They did not break. The other 11 sovereigns acknowledged this truth. It was unusual, but not unprecedented. Some species had walked the path without breaking. The Torvex had done it through chemical suppression of their fear responses. The mindless ones had done it because they literally could not feel fear. There were explanations. What is unusual, continued Methari, the keeper of psychological archives, is how they did not break. They felt fear. Our sensors confirm this. Elevated heart rates, stress hormones, chemical markers of anxiety. They were afraid. But they kept walking, said Velthine, the Concord's chief strategist. Fear and action are not mutually exclusive. No, but they should be correlated. Fear is the great motivator that drives species to submit. This is the foundation of everything we have built. Methari projected data into the shared space. In 11,000 years, we have processed over 3,000 species through the path of petitioners. Every single one has responded to fear in predictable ways. Flight, submission, or aggression. These are the only options. The humans chose none of these. Correct. They responded to fear with acceptance. They acknowledged the danger and continued forward anyway. This pattern does not exist in our models. The sovereigns contemplated this. Their deliberation happened at speeds that would seem instantaneous to lesser beings, but to them, it felt like ages of careful thought. Velthine accessed the strategic archives. Let me show you what we know about this species. Images and data filled the shared space. Earth, a small blue planet in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. Humanity, a species that had existed for perhaps 300,000 years, a heartbeat in cosmic terms. Their history unfolded in compressed form. They nearly destroyed themselves, Velthine said, multiple times. Nuclear weapons developed centuries before they had the maturity to handle them. Climate disasters caused by their own industrial development. Biological weapons. Artificial intelligences that nearly wiped them out. The images showed cities in ruins. Wastelands where forests had once stood. Mass graves and mushroom clouds, and the slow death of ecosystems. Each time, they approached extinction. Each time, they survived. Not through wisdom or planning, but through something else. What? Asked Keth, our ROS. Methari answered. We have been trying to translate the concept. The closest approximation in our linguistic framework is stubborn refusal to accept endings. They simply do not give up. Even when logic dictates surrender, even when hope is mathematically impossible, they continue fighting. This sounds like admirable determination, said one of the younger sovereigns. No, you do not understand. Velthine projected new data. This is not determination. Determination implies a goal, a desired outcome. What the humans have is different. It is a fundamental inability to accept that things cannot be changed. They look at impossible situations and simply refuse to acknowledge the impossibility. The evidence was clear. Human history was full of moments where individuals and groups had achieved things that should not have been achievable. Not through superior technology or resources, but through sheer persistence. They also do something else that is unusual, Methari added. They prepare for disaster obsessively. Look at their cultural output. The shared space filled with human artifacts. Books about the end of the world. Films depicting extinction events. Video games where players survived apocalyptic scenarios. Art showing cities in flames and the last survivors struggling against impossible odds. They are obsessed with their own destruction, Methari said. They imagine every possible way they could die, and then they celebrate it. They share these stories with each other. They find them entertaining. Why? Kethferos asked. We believe it is a form of psychological preparation. By imagining extinction constantly, they have inoculated themselves against the fear of it. They have faced death so many times in their imaginations that real threats feel familiar rather than overwhelming. The sovereigns processed this information. It was, in its own way, terrifying. Ambassador Vance said something significant, Velthine noted. She said that panic is a luxury for species who believe they are safe. The implication is clear. Humans have never felt safe. From the moment they developed consciousness, they have been aware of their own vulnerability. They have never had the comfort of believing they would survive. And yet, they have survived. Yes, despite everything. Against all odds, they have survived. The deliberation paused. The sovereigns considered what this meant for the Concord. The galactic order had been built on a simple principle. Fear was the great equalizer. Species that feared extinction could be controlled. Promise them safety, and they would submit. Threaten them with destruction, and they would obey. This had worked for 11,000 years. It had created a stable, hierarchical civilization spanning most of the galaxy. But the humans did not fit this model. If they cannot be controlled through fear, Kethvaros said slowly, then they cannot be integrated into the Concord. A species that does not fear has no reason to submit. We could destroy them, suggested one of the military-minded sovereigns. Remove the anomaly before it causes problems. Could we? Velthine asked. Certainly, we have the power. But consider what we have observed. They respond to threats not with fear, but with preparation. If we attack them, they will not surrender. They will fight. And while they would certainly lose in the end, the cost might be higher than we expect. They are a young species, technologically inferior. What cost could they possibly inflict? Methari answered. Unknown. And that is precisely the problem. Every species we have ever encountered has followed predictable patterns. We could model their behavior, anticipate their responses, plan accordingly. The humans do not follow patterns. They do things that should not work, and somehow they work anyway. You are suggesting they are unpredictable. I am suggesting they are dangerous in a way we have not encountered before. Not because of their strength, but because of their psychology. A species that accepts extinction as a possibility does not negotiate the same way as species that fear it. They have nothing we can threaten them with that they have not already imagined. The deliberation continued. Time passed differently in this space. What felt like days to the sovereigns was barely hours in the normal universe, where 12 humans sat playing cards on the floor of the sovereignty chamber. Finally, Kethvaros spoke again. There is another option, one we have not considered for a very long time. The other sovereigns waited. We built the Concord on fear because we, too, once feared. We were not always gods. We were young ones, vulnerable. We learned to control other species because we needed security. We needed to know that the galaxy would not threaten us. Kethvaros projected images from the Concord's own ancient history. A time before the Empire, when the founding. Species were struggling for survival in a hostile universe. We have forgotten what it was like. We have become so powerful that we cannot imagine being otherwise. And in our power, we have lost something. What? The ability to meet equals. For 11,000 years, every species we have encountered has been beneath us. We have never had to face a civilization that would not bow, that could not be controlled, that simply refused to acknowledge our dominance. The humans are not our equals. They are far below us in every measurable way. In technology and power, yes. But power is not the only measure of a species. Ambassador Vance stood before us and did not beg. She did not threaten. She did not try to negotiate or bargain. She simply stated who her people were and accepted whatever we chose to do about it. Kethvaros paused. When was the last time any of us were brave enough to do that? The question hung in the shared space, unanswered. The humans cannot be controlled. They cannot be integrated. They cannot be safely ignored. These are the facts. The question is what we do with them. The deliberation would continue for what felt like much longer. But something had already shifted. For the first time in millennia, the High Sovereigns were uncertain. And uncertainty, they were beginning to remember, was not always a weakness. Sometimes it was the beginning of something new. 3 days passed in the sovereignty chamber. 3 days of waiting in a small circle of light while the fate of 8 billion people was decided somewhere beyond human understanding. The humans had adapted, as humans always do. They slept in shifts, using their jackets as pillows. They rationed the small amount of food they had brought. They talked about home, about families, about the lives they might never see again. And when the talking was done, they sat in comfortable silence together. Dr. Tanaka was teaching Commander Tyrell a Japanese card game when the light changed. The soft glow around them flickered once, twice, and then the entire chamber blazed to life. The 12 humans stood quickly, brushing off their clothes and trying to look dignified. Around them, the floating platforms filled again with observers from across the galaxy. The representatives of 900 species had returned to witness the verdict, and on their thrones of compressed starlight, the High Sovereigns materialized once more. Kepharos was the last to appear. The ancient being settled onto its throne and looked down at the small group of humans with an expression that was impossible to read. Ambassador Alara Vance of Earth, step forward. Vance walked to the center of the chamber. Her uniform was wrinkled, her hair was messy, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She had never looked less like a diplomat. She had never felt more like one. The High Sovereignty has deliberated. We have analyzed your species, your history, your psychology, your potential. We have considered every option, and we have reached a decision. The chamber fell absolutely silent. Not a whisper, not a breath. The galactic networks, broadcasting to trillions of viewers across thousands of worlds, held still. Humanity presents us with a problem we have not faced in 9,000 years. You do not fear, and so you cannot be controlled. You do not submit, and so you cannot be integrated. You do not follow the patterns we have learned to expect. By every standard of our civilization, you should be destroyed. Vance did not move. Behind her, she heard Dr. Park whisper a quiet prayer. Commander Tyrell shifted his weight, old combat instincts preparing for a fight that could never be won. Somewhere in orbit, fleets bearing the mark of the Concorde began powering their weapons. Extinction protocols that had ended countless species before were warming up, ready to execute. But Kepharos continued, and the word hung in the air like a physical thing. You have also shown us something we have forgotten. The ancient being rose from its throne. Just as before, the movement sent shockwaves through the watching crowd. High Sovereigns did not stand. They had not stood during a petition in 3,000 years. And now, for the second time in 3 days, Kepharos was on its feet. We built this Concorde on fear. Fear of destruction. Fear of chaos. Fear of the unknown. We created order because we once knew what it was to be afraid. But we have been powerful for so long that we forgot. We forgot what it was like to face the darkness without knowing if we would survive. Kepharos began to descend from the throne platform, drifting slowly down toward the floor of the chamber where Vance stood alone. You reminded us. You walked through our path, faced our threats, stood before our thrones, and you did not beg. You did not fight. You did not bargain. You simply existed, accepting whatever came next. This is not something we have seen in a very long time. The High Sovereign stopped a few meters from Vance. Up close, the being was even more impossible to comprehend. Light bent strangely around its form. Looking at it directly was like trying to focus on a memory that kept slipping away. Ambassador Vance, humanity is not granted membership in the Galactic Concorde. Gasps echoed through the chamber. The watching crowd erupted in murmurs and whispers. On the platforms above, species that had lived in the Concorde for millennia exchanged confused glances. This was not how it was supposed to happen. Species were either destroyed or accepted. There was no middle ground. In orbit, the extinction protocols moved to final readiness. Instead, Kethvaros said, and silence returned instantly. Humanity is recognized as something we have not seen since the founding. An equal, not because of your technology or your power. These things are far inferior to ours. But because you walked into the heart of our civilization, faced our greatest weapons, and simply waited to see what we would do. The extinction protocols powered down. The weapons went cold. The fleets, standing ready to end humanity, received new orders and began to stand down. We do not grant you membership, because membership implies submission. You would not submit. We do not destroy you because destruction implies superiority. We are not sure, anymore, what superiority means. Kethvaros turned to face the watching crowd, addressing not just the humans, but the entire galaxy. For 11,000 years, the Concord has operated on a single principle. The strong rule. The weak obey. This has created order. This has created stability. But perhaps it has also created blindness. We have forgotten that there are forms of strength that cannot be measured in firepower or fear. The ancient being turned back to Vance. Humanity will be recognized as an independent civilization, equal in standing to the Concord itself. You will have your own space, your own laws, your own future. And if you choose, you will have our friendship. Vance stood very still, processing what she had just heard. Behind her, the other humans were in various states of shock. Dr. Tanaka had her hands over her mouth. Marcus Webb had stopped his recording device, then immediately started it again. Not wanting to miss a moment, Commander Tyrell was the first to speak. What just happened? But Vance did not answer him. She was looking at Kethvaros, at this being that had ruled the galaxy for longer than human civilization had existed. You are offering us friendship, she said slowly. Why? Because, Kethvaros replied, we are curious about you. Just as you said you were curious about us. It has been a very long time since anything in this galaxy made us curious. A sound started somewhere in the chamber. It took a moment for Vance to realize it was laughter. Quiet at first, then spreading. The humans were laughing. Not at the sovereigns, not at the situation. They were laughing from pure relief, from the sudden release of tension that had been building for days. Vance felt the laughter bubbling up in her own chest and did not try to stop it. She laughed until tears ran down her face, until her sides hurt, until she had to bend over and catch her breath. When she finally straightened up, Kethvaros was still watching her with that unreadable expression. I apologize, she said. We have been waiting a long time, and we did not expect this. What did you expect? Death, slavery, something terrible. These are the stories we tell about first contact with superior civilizations. They never end well for the weaker species. Your stories are often correct. For most species, meeting us is the end of their independence. Why do you think yours ended differently? Vance thought about the question. She thought about the path, about the garden of extinction, about the illusions of Earth burning. She thought about the long days of waiting, playing cards on the floor of a chamber built for gods. Because we didn't try to be anything other than what we are, she said finally. We didn't pretend to be stronger or smarter or less afraid than we actually were. We just showed you who we are and let you decide what that meant. Yes, Kethvaros agreed. That is exactly what you did. And it is exactly what we needed to see. The High Sovereign extended something. It was not quite a hand, not quite a tentacle, not quite anything that had a human name. But the gesture was clear. Vance understood. She reached out her own hand and placed it against the alien appendage. It felt like touching frozen lightning. It felt like the future. We did not come here to be controlled, she said. And we did not come here to conquer. We came because the universe is vast, and we would rather not walk it alone. Catharos made a sound that might have been agreement. The stars, which had waited for panic, for screaming, for the death of another young species, stayed silent. And in that silence, something new began. In the days that followed, the humans were escorted from the sovereignty chamber to ships that would take them home. They were treated not as subjects or enemies, but as guests. Representatives from other species approached them cautiously, asking questions, offering tentative greetings. Word had spread quickly. Humanity was different. Humanity had done something that no one had done before. On the shuttle back to the Quiet Defiance, Marcus Webb finished writing his first draft of what would become the most important document in human history. He called it simply The Walk. Dr. Tanaka taught the song she had sung on the path to 3 different alien species. Within a year, it would be heard on worlds thousands of light years from Earth. Commander Tyrell finally relaxed for the first time since receiving the original summons. He slept for 14 hours straight, and Ambassador Alara Vance stood alone on the observation deck, watching Ethon Prime shrink behind them as they began the long journey home. She had walked into the capital of a galaxy-spanning empire with nothing but 11 companions, and the hope that being human would be enough. It had been.